Well, hello again, everyone. This weekend, we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 30 and 31. And as I mentioned in an email this week, um, we'll be taking off the next 2 weeks because Lisa's going to be on vacation. So we won't have a way to record them. And then we'll come back following that. So tonight, we'll start with Genesis chapter 30, which is Jacob's dozen, or Jacob's children, as the picture says. And Lord, I pray that you would speak to each of us tonight through your word as we study these two chapters. Let your word not return to us void, but let us accomplish that for which you sent it. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, as we get started, I love this chapter because it tells me that the Lord can work through boneheads like me and probably all of us to get his will done. We don't we don't block his plans from getting done. So we'll jump into this. Genesis 30, verse 1 and 2. Now, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, remember in the last chapter, Leah, her sister, had given Jacob 4 sons. And so now the competition is on. So when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children or else I die." And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" So as you read this, you realize seasons of unfruitfulness are really intended for us to draw closer to the Lord. Instead, Rachel is envying her sister. She's blaming her husband, and she's pulling away from God. Now it says that she envied. The word is kana. In Hebrew, it means to be jealous of, to be angry with, literally to be red-faced. So envy is getting angry at another person's blessings. In Deuteronomy 29:18, we see that there may not be among you a root of bitterness or wormwood. And in Hebrews 12:15, looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up, causing trouble. And by this, many become defiled. So envy is a very, very bad sin for us. Envy and jealousy. They just lead to all kinds of problems. So now Rachel is blaming Jacob for her barrenness while he's having plenty of kids with Leah. Um, Rebecca should be praying, not blaming other people for this. And if we might, a spiritual truth from this, it's much easier to blame somebody else for our problems than it is, because it hurts when we think that we may have fallen short. And we need to go to the Lord and ask him to show us if maybe we're the problem and not somebody else. We seem to be self-justified rather than finding out if it might be us. Well, as we know that Jacob worked 14 years for her, and he wouldn't have worked a single day for Leah. So Rachel says here, "Else I die." It sounds a lot like Esau. Remember, if you don't give me a bowl of stew, I'll die of hunger. And he sells his birthright. So a question I had here listening to, if you don't give me a child, I'll die. I wonder if this is not a threat of suicide on her part, Rachel's part. In Psalm 127:3, we're told that children are a heritage of the Lord. So we need to go to the Lord if that's a problem. And there's another story in 1 Samuel 1, verses 10 and 11, of Hannah, who was also barren. And she was in bitterness of soul, and she prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. And then she made a vow and said, "O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I'll give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. In other words, a Nazarene vow that he'll be dedicated to the Lord for his entire life. So here we see the contrast. Rachel is envying her sister. Hannah's weeping to the Lord, asking for him to give her a child. So we should imitate Hannah when we're in need, or we're tempted to envy somebody or something else that somebody has. We need to go to the Lord with that. Now, anger, the word is ap, A-P. It means your nostrils are flared, you're breathing heavy. I mean, really angry, red face. And clearly, this isn't the fault of Jacob, because he's not having any problem having children with his other wife. So, as another spiritual truth, maybe Rachel is putting Jacob in God's place. She's trying to make Jacob responsible for her getting pregnant instead of turning to the Lord. And we're told that we should have no other gods before him. And that's what she's trying to do. Now, in John 21, verses 19 to 22, it said, "This he spoke, signifying by what manner of death he would glorify God." This is Jesus talking to Peter. And John, remember, John is the one that's writing this. "And when the Lord had spoken this, he said to him, to Peter, 'Follow me.' And then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved." Remember, this is John writing this, following, and he said, who also had leaned on his breast at the supper and said, "Lord, who is the one that betrays you?" So Peter is looking at John, and he sees him, and he says to Jesus, "But Lord, what about this guy?" Right? Is it the Lord's talking directly to Peter, and Peter said, "Well, what about him?" And we have a tendency to do that sometimes. Why am I having to deal with this, Lord? What about that person over there? So another spiritual truth here is that Leah is having kids, but no love from Jacob. And Rachel has Jacob's love, but no kids. And the truth is, we all have problems. We need to trust God because he knows exactly what we're going through, what we're dealing with, and why. And he's the only one that can change our circumstances. So what does Isaac do in the same situation? Remember back a couple of chapters? Genesis 25:21, Isaac prayed for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Here, Jacob he's only here because his dad prayed. And now he's in the same situation. Instead of praying, he gets angry with his wife. So in verse 3, so Rebecca, or Rachel says, "Here is my wife, or my maid Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her." Then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as a wife, and Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son." And therefore she called his name Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob another son. And Rachel said, "With great wrestling I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed." And so she called his name Naphtali. So we see here in these verses, a child on my knees. We've discussed this once before. A servant would literally sit on the baron's wife's lap and have relations with her husband, basically become a surrogate wife or surrogate mom. And so it says that Jacob went into her. He doesn't seem to be too choosy. It seems that he wants to bring about the promise where he's going to have children like the stars in the sand. It doesn't matter who he has them with, just so he has them. And I guess he forgot about Abraham and Hagar and Ishmael and all the problems that caused. He seems to have forgotten all about that stuff. So Dan, the name means judge or judgment. So his Rachel is feeling vindicated. See, God's judging in my favor now. He's ruled in my favor and given me a son. And Barnhouse wrote, as I was studying, I came across this. Can a woman get so low that she will hit her sister over the head with a baby? And that's basically what Rachel's doing now. It's a contest. She needs to outdo her sister. So let's do this again. And she obviously gives her maid to her husband again because Naphtali is born, which means wrestling or striving. So it's a baby competition. I've wrestled with my sister and I've won. So Leah had given him 4 sons. Now Rachel is providing him with 2 more through her maid. Now, verse 9, it just gets crazier. When Leah saw that she had stopped bearing and looking at her sister, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. So right back at you, sis. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And then Leah said, a troop comes. So she called his name Gad. And then Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And then Leah said, I'm happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. And so she called his name Asher. So that's 4 for Leah, 2 for Bilhah, and 2 for Zilpah, if I'm remembering the names right. That's 8 at this point. 4, 6, 8, yeah. So if it's okay for you, sis, I'll just do the same thing, tit for tat. So Gad, his name means lucky or good fortune has come. Hence, they get the word troop. A bunch of us are coming forth. And then Asher, it means to be happy or fortunate. So these kids are nothing but pawns in the game between these 2 sisters battling it out. And Leah seems to have lost the peace that she had and the praise she was giving after she had Judah, her 4th son. Now she's back into this competition. So now we're done with the births for the time being. When we get to these kids growing up. So now Reuben, who's the oldest of the boys, went in the days of the wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. And Rachel apparently saw this, and she said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes, which makes no sense unless we look into some of this stuff. Mandrakes are dudaim, or doodah, I guess. It's a root that's thought to be an aphrodisiac that stimulates sexual activity. It was called a love apple, and it's supposed that it had fertility powers. All of that was purely superstition. But basically, God isn't coming through for me, so let's try some of these love apples. So she wants to get the love apples from her sister. So just a question I had, do we ever get tired of waiting on God and try to do it other ways? I mean, who gave these women children? Was it mandrakes or was it God? But we lose this in this process. We get frustrated waiting and we do all kinds of crazy things. So verse 15, but Leah said to her, is it a small matter that you've taken or stolen away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? So Rachel says, okay, therefore he, Jacob, my husband, I'll give you permission to lie with him tonight for your son's mandrakes. So you can have, or I'll trade you, you can have Jacob, my husband, for some of the mandrakes. So it doesn't sound like she's too happy with Jacob here. Apparently, Rachel is managing the Zugzug calendar, and she makes all these arrangements for people. And so the reference here to the movie Caveman, if you will, you can have my husband and give me some of the mandrakes. So verse 16, now Jacob's coming out of the fields in the evening where he's been taking care of all of the flocks. And Leah goes out to meet him and she says, you must come in to me tonight, spend the night with me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he laid with her that night. He doesn't seem to care who it is. just so he ends up with more kids. So I have hired you with some mandrakes. And you don't see Jacob complaining here. I mean, that was easy. It's hard to believe we're reading this in the Bible, that this could be happening. So another observation, this is one crazy mixed up story, and yet God is using these people to bring into being the 12 tribes of Israel. I mean, it's just unbelievable to me. He uses imperfect people in imperfect situations to bring about his desired outcome. So as a pastor, I know that I had to counsel some married couples with problems, but never anything like this. One man and four women, three of them having babies, and the fourth one upset because she isn't. I mean, I can't even imagine counseling sessions with these people. In verse 17, and God listened to Leah, so she must be praying, and she conceives again and bore Jacob a fifth son. So she had four, then she gave her maid to provide two more. Now she prays. She ends up getting pregnant again and bearing a fifth son. And Leah says, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. And this one stood out to me. There's a verse I read years and years and years ago. It's always stuck with me. And Issachar's name means brings a reward or a recompense or bought with a price, hired literally. But in First Chronicles 12:32, of all the different tribes of Israel, it says the sons of Issachar who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. Their chiefs were 200, and all of their brethren were at their command. And I've often prayed that for myself. I prayed that over my staff at Cornerstone Credit Counselors, that we would be like the sons of Issachar. And in these days and times, if anybody needed to be listened to, it would be people who are sons of Issachar, who understood the times that they're living in and what Israel or God's people ought to do. I pray that for all of us that listen to this, that we would understand these times and we would know what Israel is to do and be able to be the answer for the people around us that will ask the questions. On verse 19, it says, then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. So this is six for her and two for her maid. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment or dowry. Now my husband will dwell with me because I have borne him six sons. So I'm sure I've won him over now. I've given him six kids plus two more with my maid. And so she called this one's name Zebulun. And afterward, she bores a seventh child. This one's a daughter, and her name is called Dinah. I know, like Dinah's in the kitchen. I remember that song. So Zebulun, that name means habitation or territory or a tribe and dwelling. So Jacob is going to dwell with me now because I've given him these six sons. So she's still looking for Jacob's love. She's still in this competition. And Dinah, the girl's name, means justice or judgment or acquitted or vindicated. Remember that name because we're going to hear a lot more about her in chapter 34. But she becomes a big part in the story later on. So Jacob may have had other daughters with these women. I don't know. It doesn't mention them. This is the first and only daughter mentioned being born to Jacob. And I think that's because she's going to be a large part in the story of this family coming up. In verse 22, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her, and he opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph. And she said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So remembered here, it's not like it just came to his mind. But it's more like with Noah in Genesis chapter 8 that we read earlier, that he's moving towards a person or an object. He doesn't have senior moments, right? God is not like our current resident in the White House. He doesn't have senior moments. And then he listened. In other words, he gave attention to or he heard. This would imply to me that Rachel is now praying to God. And if so, that would have been an excellent decision on her part. He opened her womb or loosened or threw open. And Joseph now is child 11 or son number 11. It's Jehovah has added or increased. He takes away my reproach and will add another. That's going to be Benjamin, who will be the 12th son, coming up in a future chapters. So Joseph is born with an assignment and a mission, which we're going to see in the future chapters. We have another couple of chapters, I think, with Jacob, and then the rest of Genesis will be the story of Joseph. So Joseph is born with an assignment and a mission. We'll see that as we read in the future. He took away my reproach, or herpa, means my disgrace or shame or rebuke or the scorn that's upon me by my enemies. And I thought, do we ever get tired of waiting on God and try it other ways? And this whole story is nothing but that. So she says, the Lord will add to me another son, but add to bring another son. Joseph is a type of Jesus, as we're going to see. And she says, the Lord has taken away my reproach, my meaningless, my shame, and he's going to give me another. So in reading through this, all these barren wombs that get opened, I think of Sarah with Abraham, Rebecca with Isaac after he prayed for her, Leah earlier in this story about Jacob, and now Rachel. We read about Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1, who gives up her son to be a Nazirite. We've studied in Luke about Elizabeth, who was the mother of John the Baptist. I mean, Scripture is full of women who could not have children, and then God miraculously gave them children who were special in the story, this whole story of Jesus we read through the Bible. Now, I would have thought the Lord would choose Joseph to be in the line of Jesus. I mean, if reading the story up to this point, but as we're going to see, it's going to be Judah. Jesus is the Lion of Judah. In Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9, when try to question these things, he says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than yours. So we just don't see the whole big picture from beginning to end, and he does. So he does things that don't make sense sometimes to me, probably to you as well. But there's reasons for all of it. Now, prophetically speaking, as I've been trying to look for prophetic examples in the Old Testament, and I've told you before how the names sometimes tell a story. And here's another example of this. If you track along with this, when I look at these names, Reuben, it means see a son. Think of the firstborn, Jesus. Simeon means hearing. And we're told in Scripture, our faith comes by hearing. Levi means join. We respond to the gospel when we hear, and we're joined to the Lord. Judah means praise, which is our natural response to salvation. Dan means judging. As we grow in the Lord, we start judging things spiritually, ourselves and the other things we see. Naphtali means wrestling. We wrestle against the flesh. Gad means a troop. We grow together with other believers. Asher, or happy, as story in the Beatitudes. Issachar means hired or a reward. And we're told that we lay up treasures in heaven, and when we do, we receive eternal rewards. Zebulun means dwelling, and I think of our eternal home in heaven. We'll be dwelling with God forever. Joseph means adding. So what do we do as believers? We become fishers of men. We grow the kingdom. And Benjamin, who hasn't come into play yet, is the son of my right hand. Jesus is at the right hand of the Father. And when we're caught up, we're told we're going to sit at Jesus's right hand on a throne. So all of these names give us kind of a picture of what's coming in the New Testament. Now, it was interesting. I was reading an article about the Muslim population across the world right now. And so I read this article, and it just an interesting fact. It says that it takes 2.3 children per family to maintain the population of a nation. And I'd heard that before. I thought it was 2 children, but it says 2.3. A family has to have 2.3 children to maintain the population of the nation. And we are well below that now, somewhere down around 1. Mexican families produce way more children than we do, and Muslims even more than that. They're in the range of between 8 and 9 children per Muslim family. In fact, it's getting so bad worldwide that in Hungary, they give parents a brand new van to drive around in if they'll have a 3rd child, so that it helps maintain the Hungarian population. Why? Because they are being overrun by Muslims that have come up from Iraq and from Syria and these nations in Lebanon and Syria because of all these turmoil that's going on there. And what are we doing? Abortion. We're decreasing our population while aliens are exploding in our midst. We're seeing it in our major cities all around the country. They're busing and flying Muslim people into the big cities so that they can win the popular election and take over the government. And many of these Muslim cities today, like in Minneapolis, Philadelphia, they're trying to institute Sharia law like they're doing in Western Europe today. We're not going to live under American laws and with your police department. We have our own police. We will live under Sharia law. We're seeing this happen all around us. Think like sons of Issachar. We understand the times and we know what we need to do. So while we're decreasing, aliens are exploding in our midst, coming across the borders and by the millions to overtake the population and the popular vote. And if we give them money and benefits, free housing, free school, free hospitalization, free education in college, so on and so forth, they'll vote for us. And that's exactly what's happening right now. And if we're here long enough, we'll end up having to speak Spanish or Mideastern just to survive. There'll be far more. I don't even know if we're Anglos or Caucasians are the majority in the country any longer. So as we move on, who gives us our children? God does. And it must break his heart when somebody intentionally eliminates one of his creation before it ever has a chance to accomplish his will for it. I just thank God for his mercy and grace. Verse 25, and it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob, remember now they're living with Jacob and all of his troops, where the 2 daughters have been married to Jacob. And Jacob says to Laban or Laban, send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country. In other words, Canaan land, the promised land. Just let me go home. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go. For you know my service, which I have done for you. So I've worked hard for you, right? He's faithfully carried out his commitment. He worked 14 entire years to end up with the 2 wives, of which he only wanted the one. And now it's time for me to move on and prepare for my future, my family's future. Verse 27, and Laban said to him, please stay, if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience. Interesting. That the Lord has blessed me for your sake. So he's the Lord, not my Lord. Then he said, name me your wages and I'll give it to you. So basically, name me your price. What's it going to take for you to leave your God and your land and follow me? It sounds a lot like Satan. What's it going to take me to win you over to my side? What will you sell out for? How much money would it take? What job? What position would you willing to give everything up for to get? That's basically what Laban's saying here. This is Satan speaking through Laban to get him not to go back to the promised land, because if he doesn't, then Jesus never comes and the end times never come to pass. Now, it says here Laban learned by experience. This is his words. The word is nakash in the Hebrew. It means, this is interesting, to whisper or to hiss like a snake. Who else whispers and hisses? Right? It's the exact same word used to describe the serpent or the snake, Satan, in the Garden of Eden that we read about all the way back in chapter 3. And the teraphim, those are little gods, little idols or enchantments, right? They practice divination or soothsaying. It's all pagan worship. And so we see this here now as the story develops. Why is Satan involved here? To keep Jacob out of the promised land. And if he can do that, he prevents the Messiah from coming. Today, what does Satan use to draw people away? Ouija boards, tarot cards. There are even so-called little c Christian tarot cards today, believe it or not. Palm reading, horoscopes, fortune cookies. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Anything he can do to draw you away from going to God with your questions, for trying to determine what the future is going to be like, right? We need to stay away from that demonic junk. It's intended to keep you from your promised land. It's Satan's way of drawing you away from what God's wanting for you. Now, in Isaiah 8:19, when they say to you, inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, that's perfect. They chirp and mutter at you. Should not a people inquire of their God? Should they require of the dead on behalf of the living? I mean, why would you want to talk to the dead? Why not talk to the living about what we should be doing? In Psalm 5:3, my voice you shall hear in the morning. By morning, O Lord, in the morning I will direct it to you and I will look up to you. That's what he desires of us. Not Ouija boards and tarot cards and fortune cookies and all the rest of it, horoscopes. So Laban is like an employer begging his best employee to stay on rather than go out and maybe compete against him at some point. It's very selfish on Laban's part. He's realized great gains because of Jacob being there and Jacob's God blessing both of them while he's there. And interesting, because didn't the Lord say that his people would be a blessing to the nations? I'll bless those who bless you. I'll curse those that curse you, and you will be a blessing to many nations. So Jacob, just by being there and working for Laban, is bringing a blessing on Laban and his family. Now, a spiritual truth, another one here, could our past or present supervisors say the same thing of us? Right? Did our work bless them and increase them? Did they see God's hand on us? I mean, our lives should speak so loudly that we don't need to say a word. We just need to work hard as unto the Lord. Our employers will see it. The people around us will see it. In fact, the people around it will probably be jealous and envious because you'll be blessed. You'll be rewarded. You'll get bonuses. You'll get promotions. I mean, that's what God does. When we're a blessing to others, he blesses us. Genesis 12. And a thought here is that God puts a desire in Jacob to return home and fulfill his destiny. What does Satan do? How much can I give you to stick around here? Right? Name your price. What's it going to take for me to keep you here? It's the deceitfulness of riches that we read in the New Testament. And remember, I've told you, deceitfulness in Greek is a word for fish bait. And fishermen spend years determining what baits a fish will go for in a particular lake or river or stream. Randy is on here. I remember Randy and I went fishing up in outside of Salt Lake, Strawberry Reservoir, I think it was called, and his friend Mello, or I think was his name. I mean, I had a whole box full of lures, and he said, "This is what you need to get." So we had to go buy a couple of these lures, and we caught more fish than we could take home and eat. A fisherman will study it and to see what it's going to take to get the fish to take the hook. Satan does the same thing. Satan monitors you and I our entire lives. He knows all of our weak spots, knows exactly what it's going to take to get us off the track. That's why we have to be so careful and make sure we stay in the word and stay in prayer, because Satan is smarter than we are. Verse 29, so Jacob said to Laban, you know how I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased. Parats is what it means. It broke forth, it exploded to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since I came. Now, you've been chilling like a villain, as they would say. And now, when shall I also provide for my house? What about me and your daughters and your grandchildren? I need to be providing for my family. In 1 Timothy 5:8, it says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Well, Jacob is just wanting to build up his own war chest for his own family. I need to take care of my own now. So Laban says, what shall I give you? What's it going to take? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this one thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. Let me pass through all of your flock today and remove from them all of the speckled and the spotted sheep and all the brown ones among the lambs and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And these shall be my wages. And I'll explain this to you here in a minute. So my righteousness or my honesty will answer for me in the time to come, when the subject of my wages comes up again before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats or brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if you find it with me. Right? I'm going to take all of these speckled, spotted, striped ones out of the flock. You keep all of the white ones and the black ones, purebred. And I'll just take these deficient ones. So give me nothing, no hiring bonus, no enormous salary. I'll earn it by the sweat of my brow and the wisdom God has given me. So remember how Abraham refused to take anything from the king of Sodom? He offered a tithe to the priest Melchizedek. But when the king of Sodom offered all of the things he had recovered from those armies, and just give me the people, but you can keep everything that you recover from there. And he said, no, I don't want you to say that you made me wealthy. Well, maybe Jacob is remembering the story here. And he said, no, I don't want you to pay me anything. Let me have these spotted, speckled sheep. And you take all the purebreds here. Because if I take from you, I'm just going to become indebted to you. That's the bottom line here. So Eastern sheep, Middle East, are generally white and the goats are black. And the spotted, speckled, and brown ones are rare. They represent about 10%, and they're usually weaker. And so this must have looked like a great deal to Laban, right? Jacob says, these will be mine. I'll take these as my wages. The usually weak weak ones. So Laban is going to get all the single colored ones, and Jacob's going to get the offspring of the spotted ones. So think 10%, maybe. I find that interesting because there's the tithe again. He's going to get a tithe of the births that come about. And he says, and this story gets even more sinister on Laban's part. The speckled or the spotted and the brown ones, they have patches or spots on them. They have diverse colors. So they're basically the leftovers or the rejects. You don't even want to breed them because you're just going to get more of the same. So Jacob, basically, he's offering to clean out the flock from all the rejects. I'll just take the rejects and put them over here in a separate flock. So all your purebreds are there together. And it sounds a lot like what Jesus does with us, right? We're the rejects. We're the ones with the spots and blemishes and diverse colors. And we're all patched back together again. And he takes us. So he says, give me the ones that seem defective to you, and I'll give you all the ones with solid colors. And Laban says, okay, right? Sounds good to me. And it'll be easy to differentiate between them. This is a no-brainer. I mean, I can just look at the flock. They're all white, and they're all black. They're perfect. I mean, so, and if I look at yours and I see a white or black one, then I'll know you stole it from me. This is how this whole thing is going down. So notice Jacob says, my righteousness or my honesty. And it reminded me years ago in California with the Christian Yellow Pages. This was a way that you could find a so-called honest person, a Christian who's doing business. So if you needed some work done, you could go to those Christian Yellow Pages. They had another one, the Christian Blue Pages, I think. Sadly, many of them were dishonest. I found in using them, they were almost always late. They did shoddy, sloppy work. They missed their deadlines. They missed their budgets. I mean, that should never be said about a Christian. I hired a Christian contractor for our house and was very disappointed, somebody from our church. I hired a Christian construction company to build the church we built out in Danville, Zion Fellowship, and I'm very disappointed in them and the budget overruns that we were forced to pay for. I hired a Christian real estate agent who worked in our church to sell our house, and it was a major disaster. He was off having an affair, had no idea that was going on. He wasn't paying any attention to our house. The spa went completely green. Our house was full of furniture from a pastor we let live there until the house sold. I mean, I would never again after that use the Christian Yellow Pages. It was just, and that's sad to say. I found people out in the world that didn't have a fish emblem in their ad were far more reliable than the people who are advertising as Christians. If we want a role model, look for somebody like Daniel, who we study, or Joseph that we're going to study. Right? In Daniel 6, verses 4 and 5, it said, so the governors and the satraps sought to find something to charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find nothing, no fault in him, no accusation, no corruption, because he was faithful. Nor was there any error or negligence or fault, carelessness found in him. Then these men said to one another, we shall not find any charge against Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Right? I pray that that could be said of all of us. The only thing they can find wrong with us is that we're Christians and we believe in God. So verse 34, and Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word, or let it be. So he, Laban, removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted. Now watch this. He's taking the speckled and spotted male goats and the female goats that were speckled and spotted, everyone that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and he gave them into the hands of his own sons, Laban's sons. Right? All of these are the ones that belong to Jacob. And he takes them all and says here to his sons, take them, Why? So that there won't be any weak ones left to bred with his pure, strong ones. You can see how deceptive this guy is. I'm going to take all of these that belong to Jacob. We'll just take care of them off over here. And all he'll have is my perfect ones. And they'll just keep breeding more and more and more perfect ones. So then Laban, put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. And Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flock. So he didn't even complain. He said, all right, fine. We'll do it your way. So 3 miles away, I mean, Jacob's not going to be able to watch over what's happening to his own flock. He's not going to have any idea what's going on. Maybe Laban wouldn't even bother feeding them. Right? Just let them die off. Who cares? They're not mine. Mine are going to be just fine. So out of sight, anything could have happened. But I think Jacob is trusting in the Lord, and we're going to see this in the next chapter. So Laban's thinking, if I take the spotted ones, they won't be able to breed with mine. Mine will keep breeding purebreds, and Laban is just manipulating and deceiving again. Now, we're seeing all of this stuff with these mandrakes and the white sticks in the troughs, all this kind of stuff. Do they work? I doubt it. Anything we have to manipulate or deceive to get, we're going to lose. And God promises it's that. So I'm sure it's God that's at work here in this story. So God has put somebody into Jacob's life so he can see his own shortcomings. I think when Jacob looked at Laban, it was like looking at himself in a mirror. This is how I've been all my life. I'm just like Laban, just a deceiver, a backstabber. So some interesting things here to note in similarities between Jacob that we can see and learn from, and in the story that we've seen so far. Jacob's wedding night, what happens? In the dark, with her wearing a veil, he ends up marrying Leah, not Rachel. What had he did to his father Isaac, who was blind? He substituted himself for his brother Esau. Right? He put on the smelly clothes and the hair around his neck and his arms, and brought in the same food as brother would have brought. So he's seeing this thing reversed. Jacob is being deceived by being given the older sister for the younger sister. What happened? Isaac thought that Jacob was Esau, so Jacob thought Leah was Rachel. You see this switch again. Jacob gets the elder sister. Isaac is tricked into giving the blessing to the younger brother over the older brother. Jacob pretends to be the older brother. Leah pretends to be the younger sister. It's bizarre world. It's like the old Seinfeld sitcoms. So verse 36a, we see there's not going to be any opportunity to breed with these speckled, spotted ones. And 36b, I'm going to put 3 miles between mine and yours. So the ones you're watching for me. So there's no way this, we're going to have a problem here. So Jacob takes the ones that are pure, that belong to Laban, and he's faithful to take care of them. But God, some God magic happens. Now here we see some of the hocus pocus. Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and chestnut trees, and he peeled white strips in them, or stripped off some of the bark, and he exposed the white was in the rods. Think like he's making these sticks look like a zebra or a referee's uniform. And the rods which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs, where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive. The word is yakam, which means to be hot or in heat, when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth, guess what? Streaked, speckled, and spotted offspring. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face. So he took all these speckled ones, he kept moving them over into his flock of cast-offs, if you will. And he separated the lambs of Laban's, and he made them face towards the streaked and all the brown of the flock of Laban. But he put his own flocks by themselves, and he did not put them with Laban's flocks. So he's doing everything he can to get Laban's animals to be looking at his, or these white striped sticks. Now, white strips, it's interesting because Laban's name, I told you last time, means white. So it's a play on words in Hebrew again. He's using Laban sticks to cause them to give him Jacob offspring. Green poplars means it's moist or fresh or new. So these were new branches on a poplar tree. Almond could also be hazelnut. And chestnut means a plain tree or on the plains. It doesn't really, I don't know that it's actually a chestnut tree. But this is a prenatal thing. The word conceive means to make hot, or it gives the animals the desire to mate. So that's what he's trying to do with these sticks. Now, modern day animal raisers confirm that streak rods do, in fact, stimulate sexual activity. So there may actually be something to this. But Jacob was hoping to bring about many offspring because a portion of them are going to be mine. So he's thinking, I'm only going to end up, all of the offspring, even of the rejects, only about 10 are going to turn out to be offspring or rejects, and the rest probably are going to be purebred. And Laban is also going to greatly benefit. But he's separating these things. So separation, he keep his away from Laban so no accusations could be made about commingling them. So this is the whole plan. And I think this also could be a prophetic verse of separating the goats and the sheep. At the end of time, Jesus is going to separate what? The goats, unbelievers, from the lambs, the believers. Remember, we studied that. And in Matthew 25, we're also going to see these separations for the Jews in Ezekiel 20. At the Bema seat in the great white throne judgments, we're going to see people separated, believers from unbelievers. So we're seeing these separations, sheep from goats. And Jacob here is being as wise as a serpent and as gentle as a dove, best I can see in the New Testament. And we're going to see more in Genesis 31. It's going to explain a lot of what's happening here in this story. So in verse 41, it came to pass whenever the stronger livestock conceived, so he's doing some selective breeding. These are all Laban's. When the strong ones came, he placed rods in front of their eyes when they went to the water things, that they might conceive among the rods. And when the flocks were feeble, he didn't put them in so that they wouldn't reproduce. So he only wanted to reproduce strong animals. And so the feebler would become Laban's in the long haul, and the stronger ones would become Jacob's. Thus the man Jacob became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks of female and male servants and camels and donkeys. So he was growing in every way. Said he was exceedingly prosperous. It means he burst out exceedingly prosperous. So sowing and reaping is now boomeranging back on Laban or Laban. It's kind of like back at you, like, but two wrongs don't make a right. So Jacob is still trying to play this game. Now, some spiritual truths for us here as we close this chapter. One, don't make wealth your goal. It never works out to our advantage. It will take our focus off of the Lord, and we'll end up worshiping mammon instead of God. Two, don't be afraid to work hard for another person's benefit and increase their wealth, because it'll come back to you. If you work hard to bless somebody because you're working as under the Lord, believe me, Lord will reward you for it. 3, work hard and dedicate yourself to your employer's success. Make them look as good as you can. People have told, my dad told me, if you make your boss look good when he gets promoted, he'll end up promoting you. And that happened to me in the phone company 5 different times. And 4, trust God and give him the glory for the successes. We just keep those priorities when we're working. Some of us on here are already retired, so it's a little late for that. But anyone listening that's still working or going to be working, these are ways to be successful. And finally, the characters in this story, the sisters, I don't see anything positive in any of them at this stage. Jacob, on the positive side, I see that he's working hard and he's succeeding because he's doing that. However, on the negative side, he's reverting back to being deceptive and manipulative. And third is Laban. He's still the same shyster. And so the only positive I get out of this whole chapter is watching Jacob work hard and succeeding. And so we're going to leave chapter 30 at that point, and we'll move on to chapter 31, and it's going to explain a lot of what's happened with these flocks. So we'll end this chapter here, Lise, and